Мы будем вообще в рамках нашего сегодняшнего мероприятия обсуждать разные аспекты, связанные с развитием цифровых финансовых услуг. И задача нашей текущей сессии состоит в том, чтобы перейти от более общих вопросов стратегического уровня, ну и такого некого мирового обзора, да, перейти к более практическим вопросам, связанным, с одной стороны, с основными тенденциями в развитии цифровых финансовых услуг, как в России, так и в мире. И второе, к регулированию этого нового для нас сегмента. Причем регулирование, в свою очередь, может быть, может носить предметный характер и быть посвящено конкретным рискам, а может носить скорее характер такого стратегического направления, которое ставит своей целью не только конкретные законы или конкретные нормативные акты, но и определение вектора развития такого сегмента, как цифровые финансовые услуги. И я хотел бы, Сергей Анатольевич уже упоминал о том, что у нас в Банке России развивается сейчас такое направление, как дигитализация отношений в финансовой сфере. Это отдельно очень мощная, большая тема, многогранная. И я хотел бы для того, чтобы осветить ее основные параметры, попросить сейчас выступить Андрея Валентиновича Акхраменова, заместитель начальника управления бизнес-процесса, департамента сбора и обработки отчетности некредитных финансовых организаций Банка России. Андрей Валентинович, вам слово, пожалуйста.
Михаил Валерьевич, уважаемые дамы и господа, спасибо большое за предоставленную возможность. Как уже говорил Сергей Анатольевич, дигитализация финансовой сферы является одним из приоритетов нашего направления и одним из приоритетных направлений. Это первое. И второе, сейчас я расскажу, чем Банк России на данный момент, какие действия он совершает в этом направлении. Во-первых, можно перейти на первый слайд. Во-первых, как вы понимаете, дигитализация затрагивает не только и не столько Банк России. Банк России является одним из игроков. Это вот в правом нижнем углу фигурирует ведомство. И про наши внутренние процессы мы, наверное, сегодня не будем говорить, потому что, задав планку на финансовых рынках, обеспечить бесшовное взаимодействие, без разрыва цепочки, без перехода бумаги на бумагу в данном процессе. Задав эту планку, Банк России просто не может не соответствовать ей внутри и не переводить свои процессы также на безбумажные технологии, на STP-процессы и так далее. Кроме того, надо понимать, что большое количество поднадзорных, которые пришли в Банк России вместе с функциями мегарегулятора, просто не позволяют такую роскошь, как бумага, принимать в качестве отчетности, в качестве взаимодействия с поднадзорными. Мы просто будем физически не способны их обработать. Именно поэтому, а не только потому, что нам дигитализация и цифровые технологии нравятся. Именно поэтому мы и занимаемся этим вопросом. Как уже сказал Сергей Анатольевич, от дигитализации финансовой сферы будет очень большое количество преимуществ прямого электронного взаимодействия. И мы выделяем три группы бенефициаров. Это потребители услуг, которые получат облегченный доступ к услугам финансового рынка, получат доверие к данным услугам ввиду транспарентности взаимоотношений на данном рынке. Мы надеемся, что также это приведет к повышению уровня правовой защищенности и к ускорению взаимодействия в нашем современном мире, когда темпы роста, темпы взаимодействия сейчас действительно уже очень велики, но нам необходимо за ними поспевать. Помимо этого, участники финансовых рынков, это кредитные финансовые организации, также должны стать бенефициарами за счет сокращения издержек на документооборот, на судебные издержки, на маркетинговые исследования, потому что все системы новые кастомеры, они базируются так или иначе на качественных электронных данных. Нормально знать своего клиента на основе только на бумаге, конечно же, невозможно. И третий актор, третья группа акторов, это ведомство, в том числе Банк России, получение среди плюсов в данном направлении, получение оперативной информации, обеспечение транспарентности, повышение достоверности получаемой информации, provision of information, higher transparency, higher reliability, because all, say, the cross-checks, compatibility issues are easier to be done in paperless form. As an example, I can give such a quite, let's say, routine thing as the motor road civil liability insurance policy. Today, it's not necessary to go to the insurance company to be there present in person. You can simply book it and pay for it online. Why do we believe that the development of digitalization will improve the competition on financial markets? So that's a classical model that shows the analysis of competitors. This model is often used when you plan to come to the market, but at the same time, the same model can be used to understand whether it's feasible to reach the final goal and whether it's realistic. The consolidated assets of non-credit financial institutions is less than 10% of our GDP, which is much lower than other OECD countries. So it gives us quite a big potential for development. Why do we believe that digitalization will improve the competition on financial markets? 4 factors. First of all, it's the access of new players, because the, let's say, access criteria will be simpler and easier. We expect that new type of consumers will also appear on the market. In addition, digitalization will allow to create new transparent products and services to increase the line of products, and it will also allow to attract new assets to the market.
Понятно, что существует отдельная инициатива по отказу от бумаги в различных ведомствах, просто бумаг людей, но для того, чтобы прийти к полноценной дигитализации финансового рынка, нам надо понять, что существуют определенные барьеры. Про них сегодня тоже Сергей Анатольевич говорил, но я немножко поясню. Барьеры были разделены на 4 основные группы, и одна группа барьеров. Одна такая сквозная группа, то есть правовые барьеры — это проблемы, связанные с тем, что электронный документооборот, электронный документ как таковой должным образом не имеет определения в законодательной базе. В части как законов, так и подзаконных нормативно-правовых актов существуют закрепленные законодательные приоритеты бумажных форм над электронными, отсутствуют урегулирование взаимоотношений, dispute resolution system, такими устоявшимися понятиями. Это комплекс правовых барьеров. Существует комплекс технологических барьеров, потому что очевидно, что переход на бумажные технологии не будет бесплатен. Также отсутствует единых стандартов и форматов взаимодействия. Кто-то считает XML единым форматом, кто-то, ну, про это мы еще сегодня немножко отдельно переговорим. И вот опять же отсутствие системы разрешения конфликтов. Большой комплекс вопросов связан с идентификацией клиентов и пользователей. Об этом уже тоже сегодня говорилось. В данном направлении мы видим следующие вопросы. То есть подходы с опорой на бумажные технологии, когда там необходимо снять ксерокс, ну, если банально такой пример. Отсутствие нормальной оценки рисков реализации системы идентификации, также одно из направлений. И большой блок вопросов, связанных с киберпреступностью, ее ростом и ростом возможностей для мошенничества. Но об этом достаточно подробно уже говорил Сергей Анатольевич, я думаю, повторяться. И сквозным вопросом является, конечно же, психологический вопрос. Это низкая как финансовая грамотность, так и низкая доверенность, доверие населения и что там греха таить нас с вами в том числе, когда мы сами иногда говорим, что нет, я лучше уж плачу это в кассе, наличными и получу вообще распубликацию ордера о том, что я действительно заплатил деньги, чем пойду в посттерминал, либо тем более поведу там онлайн-транзакции. Это тектонический сдвиг в мышлении должен быть произведен. И вот на реализацию, на популяризацию этих вопросов направлена пятая подгруппа. Как уже было сказано, основным инструментом реализации данной политики, данных направлений Банка России является межведомственная рабочая группа. Во-первых, и ответственный секретарь, который руководитель экспертного совета Андрей Петрович Мwaura и руководители по нескольким направлениям здесь присутствуют. Я призываю здесь сегодня на семинаре в рамках живого общения общаться с руководителями экспертных подгрупп. Они гораздо больше погружены в данные вопросы, и они гораздо более открыты и хотят слышать новые идеи, и хотят привлекать в качестве экспертов в работу межведомственной рабочей группы новых людей. Если мы перейдем к следующему слайду, то можно сказать, что мы определили следующее направление для меры по преодолению правовых барьеров. Это совершенствование федерального законодательства об электронном документообороте, как я уже сказал, уточнение документ в электронной форме, подлинник документов, заверенная копия документа, экземпляр, публикация документов, то есть все, что связано с понятийным аппаратом. Это вторая мера, это устранение дублирования электронного документооборота бумажным, когда у нас
paperback documents. Development of e-documents from the side of the Bank of Russia. Very often we still have to keep papers somewhere in archives.
И существующие в электронном виде распечатываются и архивируются, и хранятся в виде печатной копии этого варианта. Третья мера – это развитие электронного документооборота при взаимодействии с Банком России.
Printed out and stored in the archives in paper. Next, what we plan to do is to improve the legislation about the digital signature.
Такой массовый сегмент для Банка России поднадзорных, как финансовые организации, это новое регулирование, которое выходит уже сейчас, оно предполагает взаимодействие только в электронном виде со стороны поднадзорных. Мы работаем над тем, чтобы обеспечить электронное взаимодействие со стороны Банка России, также с поднадзорными полностью в электронном виде. То есть там ведется большая работа, у нас есть дорожная карта по отказу от бумаги полностью. И я думаю, когда к тому моменту, когда межведомственная рабочая группа придет к ее инициативе, созданные и спланированные межведомственной рабочей группы придут к пункту реализации, Банк России также будет готов соответствовать этим высоким требованиям. Четвертым мерой по преодолению правовых барьеров является совершенствование законодательства об электронной подписи. Там также это комплекс вопросов избыточности требования законодательства к усиленной к электронной подписи, рискоориентированный подход к подписи и стоит вопрос взаимодействия с удостоверяющимся, которых больше более 300
authentication centers, maybe with the use of the mobile operators. Fifth is the improvement of e-documents value in courts.
Одним из примеров может быть, что суды действительно по нашей информации принимают там, допустим, распечатки из логов с сервера в качестве доказательной базы, но я подчеркиваю, что это распечатки логов.
The prints out from the logs
and I emphasize this. That is the electronic evidence in printed form. And that is the issue that we are working at in our working group. And point 6 is regulation of the issues for storage and elimination of electronic documents. And here we have quite a huge storage, and that is the gray zone for us so far, because if we speak about paper documents and documents are archived for 75 years, and that is both for legal entities and individuals, physical persons, private clients. From the standpoint of electronic documents, these issues have not yet been developed. That is the initial stage of consideration of such issues. Also, I'd like to take a look at the problems of identification of clients and the trends, and what we are doing in our interdepartmental working group. One-time identification, that is for getting services within the framework of one single organization. Also the issue of orders, but that is the second issue, and the possibility to in-charge identification to third persons, and what to do with operations with low level of risks. Also, we have certain services for unification, services with regard to the post. And thirdly, the third problem, that is the expansion of risk-oriented approach, using it more broadly, and I think that we've got to have a full matrix of risks, mitigation of risks, that is, if the risk is not very obvious, it is remote, then we've got to use specific strategy for it. And also we've got to review the legal framework. And another thing I'd like to mention is electronic format for data exchange. And the Bank of Russia is also working on working out a single format on the basis of XML, and certain options are possible. We tend to use XBRL, but that is a secondary issue. XML is also one of the formats which could be used as a basic one, but that is not so very essential so far. But that is either mid-term or short-term perspective. And why do we think about XBRL? We had our analysis and came to the conclusion that most countries of G20 and BRICS countries have already started using XBRL or are working on that. And if you take a look at the slide, you'll see that XBRL is usually linked to the international accounting standards, financial standards, and the Bank of Russia is now working on this, and we've created specific working groups for the purpose. Thank you very much, Andrey Valentinovich. In fact, this presentation is very essential, and it gives you an idea about what is happening in the world, that the changes are really great, and there are new forces which are coming out into the market. Within the central bank, we also have great changes, because indeed to have progress on such issue as digitalization in banking sphere, that was really very, very difficult and strategic, and the
безусловно, говорит о том, что мы для
since
себя
the bank
другой
selected
альтернативы,
that as one
кроме
of the
как
priorities that is very
электронного
important,
документа
but
оборота на
we
всех
do not
этапах
see any other
взаимодействия между
alternative
регулятором
but
финансовой
electronic
организации и заемщиком, альтернативы реально
document
сегодня не
flow,
видим.
and there is no other way. And our topic of digitalization is actually part of the process. And now I'd like to give the floor to the person who directly or indirectly was mentioned when we spoke about the expertise of the countries. So we give the floor to Stephen Mwaura, who is the chairman of the Payment Council from the Central Bank of Kenya. Kenya is becoming a classical example with regard to this issue. So they started the strategic area and direction and have become pioneers in this work and showed the level of possibilities and even revolution when you use new technologies. But we're very interested now in how all is regulated. Stephen, you have the floor.
Let me use the Russian. Spasibo. As a way of starting. Spasibo. First and foremost, on behalf of my governor, Professor Jogona Dungu, and on behalf of my colleague, Evelyn Kironzo, we are very honored as a country and a central bank to be present in Russia. My first experience with Russia is when I was reading in my high school development of railways, and there was a requirement that I study the railway from, I hope my pronunciation is correct, Vladivostok to Moscow. For us in the developing countries, we had to study, and you can imagine me struggling with all the names along that railroad to get to Moscow. Here, I want to say that Russia as a country has always been in the forefront of infrastructure development. And for that reason, to ask me to talk about infrastructure, I like to see payments more as an infrastructure than anything else. So if you imagine the railway and if you begin to conceptualize what does the railway do, it does a lot of things, but it transports goods, it also transports services. And before I go into my presentation, I also tend to ask those of you who are here, what is this? What do you call this?
Smartphone.
He's calling it smartphone, but what do you call this? Is it a phone?
Yes.
Really?
Telephone.
It's a telephone. Is it really a telephone? I just, while sitting here, did a WhatsApp, and I have already sent your pictures to my wife. She already knows where I am, sitting here. So I still want to believe that this is not a phone. What is this? So the first case in my presentation is you have to walk away from here asking yourself, what is this that you are carrying? Is it a phone? Is it a camera? Is it a video? Is it a card? Is it a credit card? What is this? I think the discovery of this gadget, a lot of us want to call it telephone. I refuse. When I recently visited Ericsson, I realized the subject Ericsson is driving is one on connectivity. So this gadget is about connectivity. This is not defined easily as a mobile phone. This is about connectivity. And I just told you, when I'm carrying this, if there is anything I don't want to forget, there are two things I don't forget every morning. I don't want to forget my clothes. As I walk out, I have to be dressed. And yesterday I spent a lot of time looking for a tie, because when I did my packing, I didn't include my tie. But I could have done what Simon did, and I could still have been able to talk without a tie. But I ended up realizing that if you leave this gadget any morning, you will find yourself feeling empty. So if I look around, I find that each one of us is carrying this. So the first thing, before you talk about mobile money and we talk about anything, keep asking yourself, what is this? And I always ask, what is this? To me, is a point of connectedness. And I think the world we are living in is such a world that is driving connectivity. So this gadget is about connected. Let me answer a question which was asked Simone. The question which was asked about the cost of money transfer using a mobile and using a bank channel. When I answered it myself, I would say that if you use a landline, imagine all of us used to have landlines. If you have a landline in your office and a message comes to that landline, what is the cost of you not being there in that office? It would mean that, and you remember we also used to recruit a lot of secretaries to continuously monitor phones and tell you so and so called, etc. But today, when I'm carrying this gadget, I am connected, and this to me is a moving ATM. So the cost of having a moving ATM vis-a-vis the cost of an ATM which is fixed in a corner of a street, or a bank branch which is located in very few places, you cannot compare those two costs. In that case, when we are talking money transfer, if I said money transfer using this gadget, I can access that money anywhere in the country. If you said it through the bank system, you can only get it in very, very limited places. When we did a cost structure, quick cost survey, we realized that in Kenya we were saving about $3 per transaction. $3 per transaction. I hope that answers that question. I decided to start with that one. Now let me go to my presentation. Here I'll be challenged, but I'll be trying my best to look that way and look at you at the same time. I will introduce the subject, which I have just started. I'll talk about the types of mobile financial services. There are two types. And I will talk about an enabling environment. I realized that the last presentation was about how Russia would wish to create an enabling environment. That's commendable. Then I will talk about the role of the central bank, as I understand it, and I will show you the impact that we have had in the short time that we have run these products. So if you could proceed in the way of introduction, if you could proceed with the slide. For those of you who do not know Kenya, the Kenyan country is as shown there. We have a very interesting geography. Along the coast, we get Mombasa. I would say some of the best beaches anywhere, and Simone has tasted them. Some of the best beaches along the Indian Ocean, that's Mombasa. Then on the right side is the country Somalia. I'm sure you have heard a lot about Somalia. This is a country where government collapsed like 20 years ago, and we are only trying very hard to talk about it. So when you talk about anti-money laundering, in Kenya we are dealing with a border of a country that has lost all forms of identification. So we could continuously screen, but screening will not solve anything. On the north we have Ethiopia. I'm sure you're familiar with Ethiopia. And on this left side we have Uganda. And then the lower side is Tanzania. If you look at the green represents the population distribution in that country. But there is something interesting about it. The line from Mombasa to Lake Victoria is where the population is concentrated. The answer to why that is so is because that's where the railway was done. So we have what we call infrastructure-led development. The railway is what really built Nairobi, is what build most of what you have around. So the same thing about the railway from Vladivostok to Moscow. When I talk about it, I talk about the railway from Mombasa to Kisumu. But the points you are seeing about the population distribution is also where the economy is concentrated. Now, we were given a country when God created the world. The north of Kenya is fully underdeveloped. And surely it's just because of lack of infrastructure. And we are now doing a new project, which we call Ramu project, to the north, which will create another corridor going up. And when I give this presentation 10 years down the line, I'll be showing you a new area that has a different concentration. I have said something important: infrastructure-led development. So when we are talking about mobile, the mobile technology is a type of infrastructure. The penetration level in Kenya is currently at 78.2. In the presentation, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Central Bank of Russia, did indicate that in Russia you have more phones than people. So when we talk about use of mobile instruments, Russia should be way ahead of Kenya in the sense that we are at 78.2% penetration, and we are still working very hard to see how we can reach the whole population. The population of the country is 41 million. Why do I give the figure of 41? So that when I start giving you figures of mobile banking and etc., you can relate it to the population. 41 million population, and the area is much smaller than Russia, 582,000 square kilometers. That is Kenya for you. Let's proceed. Now, there are two types of financial services. And this is very important when you are discussing financial services. There is what we call additive. And this additive is nothing other than you using your mobile phone to reach your bank. As easy as that. And that effort of reaching your bank through technology is not Kenyan, it is international. You can use many instruments to reach your bank. You can use internet, and we have a lot of internet depending on the internet penetration. You can use credit and debit cards. In any case, the credit and debit cards are nothing other than attempts to allow you to reach your bank account. So to us, the debit and credit debate, and here with John, we very much know that the efforts around the additive model have been going on and will continue going on. However, we have what we call disruptive technology. All these arrangements that have been going on have been disrupted. And in Simon's presentation, he did tell you that some of the resistance you get it because those who have been on this path are actually going to be the first barrier. So when I listen to your presentation, barrier number one will be those who have been benefiting from the old model. And they will be telling you that we can do it. But if you remember Simon's presentation, the developments in this space have required new players. So where you have, and this is why I'm in the presence of commercial banks and commercial bank associations, the first resistance you get, most of it comes from those who are advancing this additive model. They will be trying to tell you we can do the mobile, we can do anything, but at the end of the day, the bankers, and I am one of the bankers in terms of innovation, for very many years, the bankers have not innovated their business models. And I would hope that there are no bankers here because I won't walk out of this building. I'm sure they will chase me out of here. But at the end of the day, let us say, in terms of innovation, banking has not really attracted a lot of innovation. It has used technology, but when it comes to the banking model, and I have been a banker from back in 1978, that's when I first worked in a bank, I find we in banking tending to be more conservative. And who drives that conservatism? Is it not the central banks? I hope that the Central Bank of Russia is not in that league of central banks who believe that only one model can play. When we begin to look at the the disruptive technologies, we have to open our mind to something very different. The model that we have been learning has to change for us to access a lot of people. Let's proceed, and you'll see in the additive model, proceed, you can be able to access your balance, you can do inquiries using very many gadgets, including the mobile and what have you. You can do funds transfer, you can do bills payment, you can top up phones, you can do checkbook requests, you can list accounts, you can change pins. That's a traditional thing, and that will continue. In fact, when I discussed with John, I say this digital thing, in respect of this old technology or old model, is going to be with us. But we are not going to stop it. But the speed at which it has been moving will be affected by a new way of looking at things. And that's why I'm happy to be with you this morning to tell you what are the new ways of looking at financial services. What are the new models? That's what we call transformational mobile. What is transformational? The red line was about telephony using copper wires. The old banking was about offering banking services through bank branches and other brick and mortar, credit debit cards. That's the old model. Transformational one, the first thing, it will not be read by banks. You will first begin to realize that the provider, central bank, is not going to be a bank. So the first challenge is, what will a central bank do when a non-bank approaches and wants to offer? We have two types of central banks. There are those central banks who say a non-bank cannot offer financial services, and therefore we write regulations to make sure that only banks can offer this service. So the first item you deal with is you have to begin to relate to non-banks. The next one, you will have to introduce new entities. And how do you introduce new entities? And then this is the only way you reach the unbanked. Now, when we talk about new entities, and this is where the legal paradigm becomes interesting, all the laws that have been written, I happen to have done law, all the laws that have been written about banking are about, number one, defining a bank. Number two, regulating a bank. And when you have really innovated, you define a microfinance. But when you look at the definition of a microfinance, you find that the microfinance is an aspect of a bank. So what do we do as lawyers? What do we do as regulators? We first of all define a bank. And then after you define a bank, you begin to regulate a bank. So what happens when an applicant who is a non-bank comes to you? You tell them to become a bank. So how would you ever overcome issue number one? Issue number one can only be overcome by deciding I'll deal with entities which are not banks. That is the first thing. And this is actually the hardest, because even as we talk about Tanzania, I'm very happy. Within our East African region, we have an East African Payment System Harmonization Committee. And why I'm happy when Tanzania has done what it has done is because we told them, this is not about Kenya. It's more about you allowing non-bank players to play. And when Tanzania did it, because they came after us, they were able to even authorize more non-players in a more organized manner. And in that respect, when Simone gives statistics that Tanzania is doing very well, we are very encouraged. So what we have been able to do ourselves is to share our experience at the East African level, at the African level, and if our influence has been to the point where we have players who are even doing better than us, that is to our advantage. We don't want one country to succeed. We want us to be the starting point, but not the end point. In that regard, when we see statistics in Tanzania, Uganda, we are very happy and encouraged. They have learned from us, and they have also looked at our mistakes, and of course, they are doing a very good job. So, non-bank, that is the first point. Non-bank players. Proceed. Now, how do you create an enabling environment? And that's why we are here. The question is, how do you create an enabling environment? And an enabling environment, I like to start with circles. Circles are normally very good ways of looking at life. What you call a policy framework. The first circle, I'll give you a number of circles. The first circle, push it. When he was talking about the regulatory framework, he was talking about e-commerce. it is in e-commerce that as a country, and every country is working on it, you have to look at your regulatory space with respect to the e-commerce. And that is where United Nations, UNCITRO, came up with model laws on how you deal with electronic transactions. So what we have done in our country, we have already come up with law that supports electronic, not for payments or for banking. It is a broader law. So it's a question of assessing where are you. So digital signatures and all that is covered under the electronic laws. And the model law that every country has been using is a model law on UNICITRO law on model laws on electronic commerce. So that one, if you cater for it within your laws, you have already done what is necessary. It's going to be based on banking alone. And there are two aspects of UNCITRO, because I participated in the debates on UNCITRO laws. There are two aspects. There is the issue of digital signatures, but there is also the issue of crime. And the cyber crime is a subject within the UNCITRO laws. And one of the aspects of cyber crime has been covered by the European Union Convention on cyber crime. So we have looked at it because cyber crime is much bigger than what you find in banking. It is bigger. So a country has to deal with the electronic issues. That's number one, because mobile is just an aspect of electronic. Now the next one is the telco regulation. How have you authorized your telcos in your country? Who plays in the space of telcos in your country? Because the new players I was referring to are players in the telco space. So it's a question of how have you structured your laws with respect to telco. And I can tell you, before telcos were competing, they would never have thought of mobile money. And like they said in economics, it's not the benevolence of the butcher that makes us get meat. It is the greed in the butcher that helps him sell as meat. The same thing happens. A telco would not necessarily want to do financial inclusion. They have no business talking about financial inclusion. But for their business model, and that comes back to Simone, for their business model and for their competition, they realize that offering financial services has value. There is a value proposition in their business. So how you regulate your telcos matters a lot. If your telcos are not competing, they may not necessarily want to do anything with mobile money. They have nothing to do with it. The next aspect is competition, and I would have preferred that competition comes last. Let me deal with payment systems. You find that in many central banks, payment systems is a new topic. So you really do not have strong payment systems departments. So I think one of the things that you should also look at is whether you have a specific unit within your central bank which is looking at payment systems. We in Kenya, let me tell you, when our application for M-Pesa came, and here I'm sharing experiences, if the only department we had in the central bank was supervision, we would not be having M-Pesa. So what then happened is that within the payment space, we could make a case for regulating mobile. But within the banking space, we may have taken long, or we may even have said no. So it's a question of what is your payment system department, how has it been built, what is the capacity? Because the first line of attack is through payment systems. The next one is bank outsourcing. Now, banks, if there is an area of innovation in banking, it's the ability to outsource. You find that banks can outsource certain services. And here we are beginning to see what you are calling agency is more about banks outsourcing. Is banks using other players to add to what they are doing. So what you call agency to me is an element of banks outsourcing. Can a bank here outsource a shop to do its business? Can a bank here do any outsourcing? And then I proceed to telco agency. There are agencies. A telco, for it to distribute its services, does it through aspects of agencies. We are riding on those agencies to drive a financial product. So you also have to look at how you regulate those in your particular country. And in our case, the telco agency became the focal point through which you can begin to introduce financial services at a very, very, very low level. You imagine that a telco agency may actually be a cash in and a cash out, just a place where you put in your money and you get it out. So when I walk around here, when we came here yesterday, the first challenge we had was how do we get dollars to rubles? And when we tried to do it in a hotel, it was not possible. Yet the hotel we were going to book into required that we use rubles. So what did we do first? We started looking for where can I convert our dollars into rubles. We went for a bank. Imagine if the bank was not very near. Our transaction will not take off. So here we are saying the cash in, cash out agencies are a very key component of this business model. So even when you are doing your regulations, it's a question of whether you will allow cash in, cash out agencies at a very low level with a very low regulation. When you talk of proportionate regulation, very low regulation, because that's the entry point to the beginning of this ecosystem. AML CFT should not be a stopper. And actually, when you are saying that it's a major issue in Russia, it was also a major issue in Kenya. But if you read FATF documents very well, they have two levels of regulation when it comes to wire transfers. For wire transfers below $1,000, AML FATF regulations give you some leeway to do things which are not as stringent as beyond 1,000, and that's why in our original authorization for payment services we stuck to below $1,000, and actually at the beginning we had 500 as the maximum. I can see my time is running out, so let me proceed here. I'll move faster because that is the policy framework that I thought is most important. Let's proceed. The neighboring policy environment, and we may be spending a lot of time, has two sides. The stability of the financial system. The second one is integrity. And the third one is consumer protection. Why do I put those ones in red? Any central bank has a responsibility for stability. And you should never introduce products in your system that will cause instability. And my fear right now, as we propose and continuously praise these products, some of us may be losing sight of the importance of stability. So in our case, we never introduce products that will affect stability. And this is why bank supervision is about the soundness of the financial institution. But when we are dealing with telcos, we don't really look at soundness. That's where the difference comes. Soundness is when you are dealing with the banking system for stability purposes. In the two which are blue, efficiency and broader access, which is the subject of today, can receive less stringent regulation because they are not soundness, so long as you are able to keep those things in focus. So this is a policy balance. And this is actually, when I spend more time on this, it is a policy balance that can allow you to segregate some certain aspects of this business and leave the others so that you can be able to manage it. If you try to manage it using stability concerns, you will lose the game, in our opinion. Proceed. I'm almost through. What is the role of the central bank then? Proceed. The role of the central bank, there are possible roles for policy makers. The first one is a regulator, and we tend to emphasize regulator, but we can also be a supervisor. We can also be an information gatherer, depending, and we can be a facilitator and a coordinator. Why do I include all this? Because wherever we go, the emphasis for central banks has been regulation, and that is why we end up having heavy regulation without looking at the other rules. So at the beginning of this subject, you don't really need to go heavy. If you go heavy, you will not get it right, in our opinion. Because if you have heavy regulation, and whenever I have given presentations, I always say it, the way you treat your 16-year-old daughter or son is different from the way you treat your 2-year-old toddler. The two are your children, but you treat them differently. So if you really want to start, you can't use the same rules you apply for your teenage daughter to the same for the 2-year toddler. So the two things have to be different in your mind. This is why the roles of a central bank have to be different across. Proceed, and I'm almost through. So the first aspect is information gatherer, facilitator, and coordinator. And this is why we normally like looking at the survey. Who are these people who are excluded, and how can we reach them? It is not about the ones who are already included, it's about the ones who are not included. If they come on board, we'll be okay. Proceed. Kenya's experience with mobile phone financial services is an easy one. It has been told by Simone and John. Look, before M-Pesa, the transfer of money, just look at that. How are we transferring money in Kenya? The first one, if you want to transfer money from the city to outside, 42% would have to look for a friend, for a family friend to take it for you, that money. The second one was using a bus or matatus. Matatus are the minivans. That one was carrying 20%. Then postal system, 18, direct deposit, 8, and you can see the bank part was about 3%, the so-called checks. So basically we are not transferring money through any known system except looking for people. So half the time in the city you are spending looking for somebody to send to your rural area or to send money. And I believe where you don't have mobile, that's what you do. You normally would want to transfer money, but how do you do it? You look for people, you spend a lot of, it's very inefficient. Proceed. After we authorized M-Pesa in 2007, by 2009, look at the numbers. M-Pesa was 47%. Electronic, immediately. The hard had reduced to 32. The bus, 9. The direct deposit, 7. And you can see that is immediately after that policy change. Proceed. Look at the growth in mobile financial services in Kenya. The mobile phone money transactions were valued at an average of 6.3 billion, or 4.6% of GDP in June 2014, or 0.22 billion Kenya shillings in 2007. The number of mobile phone money customers increased from 0.05 million in April 2007 to 25.9 million. Remember, my population was 41 million. So 25 is actually half the population within a very short time. And then the 2.2 billion has been transferred using that type of transaction. But what is important is to look at this. It is continuously growing, meaning the space which you are playing was not being contested. And this is very important. And then another thing I would want to say when I'm at that graph, the level of regulation increases accordingly. When we talk of proportionate regulation, the level of regulation increases proportionately. Now, how long has it taken us to write the laws? 7 years. Our National Payment Systems Act and National Payment System regulations took 7 years to develop, and it grows with the growth of the product. So you can progressively customize what you are doing so long as you are aware of the gap. So we cannot, if we said we will wait to write the National Payment Systems Act, it would have taken us 7 years to start M-Pesa. So you can see the risk of saying regulation comes first. Here we monitored and we progressively grew with the regulation, and that is an important dynamic in this space. Proceed. Now it is important to say that the digitization of payments is not just mobile. And why I give this diagram is because the large value payment system in any country has to be run by the central bank. The CAPS is the one that is running our value per day. And the figures I've given you in Kenya shillings, we have like 100 billion shillings running through our RTGS, while at that time the mobiles are moving 6 billion a day. So in terms of stability, mobiles are not affecting our stability. The second one is the checks and ACHs. They are something like 10 billion, and the cards are about 4 billion, so 6 billion. Now, this is where, Simone, I want to be careful. When we talk about countries where it is growing very fast, I would like to monitor this. If you allow a lot of your money transfer to be through the mobile, you will be creating instability. So one of the reasons we have not allowed for larger values is because we don't want to affect stability. We could, if we did allow them to do double the amounts, we could have this number double, but that's not our goal. Our goal is to make sure that the stability is not lost. And I think when we begin to deal with AFI, we'll be very careful to tell countries not to affect stability, because that's a dangerous thing. If you allow stability, then you'll have to change the way you regulate the telcos. Proceed, and I'm almost through. Now, in terms of volume, the volume moved in the mobile per day, while the transactions in the RTGS are at like 8,000 a day, the mobile is moving something like 2 million per day, 2 million transactions, and the rest is the cards. The cards are moving much less. So when the Deputy Governor was saying that the card may be a product of the past, we are beginning to see that happen. And let me tell you, the card companies are not going to sit pretty when such changes are taking place. They either come and play in the mobile space, or their business models are quite affected, because you can see the mobile is beginning to eat into the space that used to be bank space. Proceed, and we're almost done. So mobile phone services have again leveraged, and this is a very important slide. It says leveraging on technology for cost-effective provision. You remember we kept saying costs. We leverage on technology to drive down costs. We started as a cash-in, cash-out money transfer payment service with e-value backed by funds in bank accounts. Evolution from purely money transfer schemes to payment systems, and currently the provision of financial services. You remember the Mwaura that was given by John. The Mwaura is just now a growth within here. So examples of interfaces that integrate the mobile phone payment platform with the banking sector. Now, what then happens is that banks at the beginning will oppose these products, but over time they will support it. Now what is happening in Kenya, all banks are now using this platform. So at the beginning there will be a lot of resistance, but when they begin to use it, there will be a lot of cooperation. In fact, that's now where competition changes. What happens when a bank which was not a player in retail begins to play in retail? The bank which was leading in retail becomes affected, and the competition issues change, and the catalytic effects of mobile financial services taking you to digital now begins to take effect. So we are actually at the very beginning of a very exciting time when banks now are ready to innovate around these products. So you will not get digital at the very beginning, you get it when banks begin to be very comfortable, and both the banking model and the mobile model begin to converge. So you remember the diagram by Simone. We are now beginning to see the convergence, and that is where we think digital financial services will start. And I'm almost through. Interfaces, linkages, and integration. That one I have already said, and I don't want to repeat because John had really covered it. Let's proceed and see. This is the next one. The outcomes in the banking sector are much more interesting. The gross deposit base increased from 498 billion or US dollars, that figure, in 2005 to 2.22 trillion in August. You see, increasing, look at the red. The growth of deposits in Kenya has been phenomenal, because now you are driving costs, you have reduced costs, and people can be able to push bank deposits. And that's how we have seen the growth of the banking sector itself. Then the growth of loans, look at the growth of loans from 399 billion or 5,000 million US dollars to 1.84 trillion or 20.825 million US dollars. That growth in credit is phenomenal. And then the increased deposit base and loan book was enabled by the expanded branch network. Even the branches are also able to increase. So what is our experience? Proceed, and I'll show you now the experience. Proceed. Our major experience is look at us in 2006, and that's what John also emphasized. The formal access to banking services after 100 years of banking was 18.9. So if you say the formal banking access in Russia is 48%, it is after how many years? After how many years are you at 48 of banking? So we were at 18.9 after 100 years. So look at the level of excluded, that 8.4. Now when in 2009 we tested this again, 22.6, we had increased slightly, but the informal, look at the informal, which is the yellow, is decreasing. And by 2013, we had that 5.2 formal. That growth within such a short time is to us the catalytic, it is a catalyst. What I would call mobile is a catalyst for this change. It has created a lot of dynamics and a lot of competition, which has resulted in 25.3 are the excluded. 25.3 are the excluded. And if this diagram we try again in 2015, we may find that the level of banked people in Kenya will very well start touching the 70%, 80%, and that is to our advantage. And if we get more people to have mobile phones, the 25.3, we should be able to start seeing figures of 80%, which is remarkable for a country which has not had resources. It's only now we are discovering oil. So it's remarkable for us to have achieved this. And let me repeat this word. The mobile can be a catalyst for a lot of things. Proceed and we finalize. Now, this man, Dennis Kimeto, you must have heard about him. He broke a new world record holder of marathon. He was able to go to 2.0257 hours. And the statement I want to make is that despite world records being broken, there are still opportunities to break world records. Despite world records being broken, there are still opportunities to break world records. I think in this financial inclusion space, we have a lot we can do. And when countries like Russia begin to play this and create the enabling environment, the numbers we are seeing for countries like Kenya, you can see we are at 78. I can see you having financial inclusion past 100 because of creating the enabling environment. If we can achieve this within such a short time, I believe Russia would do. But then don't forget, when we do the Olympics, Russia tends to get more medals because of winter and other games, but we don't have winter, so we cannot compete there. But when it comes to space where we can play, you give us a bit of a chance. Thank you very much.
Спасибо большое, Стивен, за яркую, безусловно, очень интересную презентацию.
Stephen. Definitely, it was a very presentation, very nice and interesting. We are a bit out of time, but I was not able to stop you. I was not willing to stop you. Well, you as a pioneer has the right. You are fully entitled to speak longer than all the others. But nevertheless, I want all other speakers, don't take this example.
Да, две ремарки хотел буквально сделать. Первая ремарка состоит в том, что, конечно же, в Центральном банке Российской Федерации созданы все те базовые условия, которые говорил Стивен. Мы отвечаем за финансовую стабильность, мы отвечаем за финансовую доступность, мы отвечаем за с очень недавних пор за права потребителей на рынке финансовых услуг, и у нас целая секция будет посвящена этому вопросу. В отношении конкуренции, кто лучше, кто хуже, банки, не банки, вы знаете, у нас очень в этом смысле
who is better or worse, banks or non-banks, that's definitely not our business. It's up to the market to decide. We are to create such an environment or such conditions that innovations are welcomed and acceptable for all market members. Well, I do agree that mobile communications are the, let's say, the driver of market innovations, but let us remember that the technologies are developing every time, so we can't even imagine what new capabilities we will have in 10 years' time. So what we have to do is just to be open-minded to all that's new. And definitely since M-Pesa was launched in Kenya, the world has changed. There are many other countries with their own experience of similar projects implementation, and Russia today is not a country who just listens, but is a country who is able to speak and to share its experience, because during the last several years we saw a revolution in innovations. This revolutionary change is not yet over, but still we are able to speak about some first results. So I'd like to ask Mr. Dostov, who is the head of e-money association, to tell us about this experience, to share with us all he wants to tell us. But Viktor, please do remember about the time.
Спасибо.
Если можно, я не буду делиться наболевшим, буду просто хвастаться.
Well, if you allow me, I will not speak about my problems and challenges. I will rather speak about our
Следующий
success.
слайд, пожалуйста. Для России проблема финансового
For Russia, the
всю нашу
topic
современную историю
of
стоял достаточно
financial
остро.
inclusion has always
На данный
been
момент мы
rather
видим цифру на этой
acute.
презентации. В 22% населения финансово исключено. Без
Here
доступа к
you
финансовым
can see
услугам.
that 22% of
Этом, как
our
уже наслышали
population
сегодня, эта
are
цифра, она варьируется.
excluded.
То
They
есть
don't have the
называется цифра в
access to
20%,
financial
называется
services.
цифра в 40%.
Today, this figure is
Объяснение для
not
этого факта, вероятно, очень простое. Если
very
мы
stable.
говорим
Some
о
speak about
цифре людей, имеющих
20%,
доступ
some
к
speak about
классическим
40%.
банковским услугам,
It
мы,
can be easily
наверное, все-таки говорим о
explained. So,
60%
if
населения.
we speak about
Но если
the
мы
access
говорим
to
о количестве
traditional
людей,
or
которые
official
имеют
banking
доступ
services, it will be about the
услугам
60% of
платежным,
our population.
кредитным и так
If
далее,
we speak
это
about
все-таки, наверное, сейчас не меньше 80%.
the
И
people
вот
who
это
have
вот
access to
гэп
any
в
type
20% занимают
of financial
современные способы платежа.
services, it will make about
Нам пришла в
80%. So
голову мысль
this
довольно
gap of
немножко
20% is
интересно проследить,
taken by contemporary
как
technologies.
благосостояние страны связано с
We
финансовыми
decided to
инструментами, которые
trace
не
how
используются.
the
Не происходит
welfare of
ли
the
по мере
country
роста GDP
is
переход в
linked
традиционные
to
тяжелые
the
банковские инструменты?
use of contemporary
Это
documents.
пока очень сырая идея, я прошу не судить строго, но мы видим,
That's
что
a brand new idea
раз по
for
мере
us.
роста
It's not, let's say,
моменты роста
that yet
GDP
finalized, but we
интенсифицируется
see
развитие
that
новых
when GDP
современных
is
финансовых
growing,
технологий.
new financial technologies
слайд.
become
При этом
appear more and more frequently.
развиваются, условно говоря, две группы.
And there are two categories, two groups of technologies
Это появляются новые продукты,
developed. First,
соответственно, появляются
new
электронные
products,
кошельки, появляются новые типы карт, и
e-wallets, new
появляются
type
новые
of
способы
cards,
доставки этих
and
продуктов к
new
потребителю,
routes
более
for
сложные, с
delivery of
технологической
such
точки зрения
products.
гораздо более эффективные. Следующий,
They
пожалуйста.
might be technical,
И вот здесь
logically
я бы хотел задать
complicated, but
вопрос,
they are much more
который
efficient than
в последнее
traditional
время
ways.
нас интересует
So
все больше
the
и больше.
question that I wanted
Ну вот
to
за те
put
15 лет, которые мы занимаемся электронными деньгами,
during
наверное, в
last
течение первых
15
7-8, может даже 10 лет у нас
that
была ясность, что
deal with
электронные деньги являются
e-money.
таким бриджевым продуктом.
We
Современный способ
understood
платежа,
that it's a kind of
интернет-платежи
a
мобильные,
bridge
призваны
product.
затащить клиента
So,
в сферу
let's say,
безналичных
new
услуг,
type of
а дальше в идеале он превращается в клиента банка, открывает счет, пользуется интернет-банком и мобильным банком, и, собственно, это вот венец творения, завершения истории. Но последние годы, в том числе во многом благодаря взаимодействию с GSMA, SAFI, мы стали понимать, что, возможно, картина устроена не совсем так. Мы видим, что следующий слайд, пожалуйста, что на развивающихся рынках традиционный банкинг пропускается, как Монголия, как нас учили в свое время, перескочившая из феодализма в социализм, минуя капитализм, так и в развивающихся странах такая классическая банковская стадия, она, оказывается, пропущенной. Люди получают доступ к финансовым услугам абсолютно без использования таких традиционных инструментов, как такие настоящие банковские счета. Простые примеры это Россия. Простые примеры мы видим в России. Мы видим, что в России сейчас 283 тысячи платежных терминалов, которые практически полностью обеспечивают потребность населения в платежах за услуги, товары в государственных платежах потенциального работы с кредитами. Мы видим, что в России имеется 40 миллионов активных электронных кошельков. И более того, мы сейчас видим очень интересное явление, что мобильные операторские платежи, наверное, представляют один из самых динамичных рынков у нас в стране. Их объем на 2013 год уже достиг 13 миллиардов рублей.
Developing market,
идет несколько вразрез о том, что говорили предыдущие докладчики. Вот здесь написано, что новый продукт – это банковские карты, да? Ну, казалось бы, да, там не 20, не 30 лет, это уже, там, не знаю, 50, 60 или даже больше лет. Тем не менее, мы сейчас видим, что Виза и MasterCard и банки запускают новые продукты, переводы с карты на карту, порталы типа Видот.ми, мобильные инструменты для управления картами, новое поколение банкоматов, кардлес банкоматы. И на самом деле отрасль электронных денег, мобильных платежей видит с этой стороны достаточно серьезную угрозу. Поэтому, говоря об инновациях, финансовом включении, мы ни в коем случае не можем скидывать со счетов.
Let's say operators of the mobile card systems see the threat posed by innovations. So speaking about new developments, we should not still forget that cards are popular and will remain popular. Today we see a lot of hybrid products, and there are no so clear borders between different types of products. Let's say we can put our virtual or tangible card into a mobile phone and use it for payment. We can have cards, let's say tangible cards linked to our e-wallet.
Интерфейс интернет-банку к мимикрированию электронных кошельков.
Today,
То есть даже для управления счетом банки начинают предлагать кошельки как более удобный продукт.
Like e-wallets. So to manage your account, you can use, let's say, this imaginary e-wallet. So, for example, that's payment options for one of our largest mobile operators. So, in your e-wallet, you can, let's say, store e-money, prepaid bills from the mobile operator or any other payments. So, the idea that e-money, e-wallet, e-card and bank account is separated is now disappearing. So, and our customers actually don't care how ones and zeros are in the long run transferred into money that can be used for payment. And the same tendency exists in Europe. We hear more and more that there's no any longer any sense to have this breakdown between debit and credit account, escrow accounts, or any other subdivisions. So we use the name kind of hybrid payment cloud. What shall be in this cloud?
Этой точкой сейчас становятся банковские счета, то есть все пытаются строить такие конструкции вокруг банковских счетов.
So today everybody tries to build such clouds around bank accounts. In Russia, let's say, most probably this starting point will be the bank accounts. The interface of such bank as Svязной is fully built on the bank card. But nevertheless, coming back to the origin of my presentation, we should not remember that the situation will remain unchanged. Most probably, we will sooner or later reach the understanding that a classical bank account is no longer viable and we need something new.
На самом деле у нас есть прекрасный шанс, как в развивающихся странах, где это в значительной степени много сделано, так и в России, инвестироваться не в развитие традиционных инструментов, как тоже было сказано в вводном докладе, не вкладываться в классическую карточную инфраструктуру с пластиком, с банкоматами и так далее, а работать уже принципиально с новыми гибридными продуктами, которые ориентированы не на носителя, не на субъекта этого продукта, а которые ориентированы только на одно, это на функциональность и на эффективность.
Linked to the carrier, but is rather focused on the functions.
Мы понимаем, что новое поколение клиентов, которые к нам приходят, оно уже тоже не ориентировано на счета. Для них это уже не интересно. Они, скорее всего, именно ориентированы на цифровые финансовые услуги, вот во всем их многообразии, которое наша организация, банки, НКО, операторы умеют предоставить. Я бы хотел, на самом деле,
and credit institutions.
нет разделения между институционально банками и небанками.
Well, today, really this division between banks and non-banks is not any longer valid. Let's say there is a distinction between smart banks who capitalize on innovations, old banks who try to stick to old traditions. I can give an example of Tinkoff Bank, Sberbank, who created a good internet banking site.
Происходит именно в той плоскости, в которой люди смотрят на потребителя, на потребности, на эффективность этих инструментов. Ну, собственно, вот на этом я бы хотел закончить презентацию и поблагодарить за возможность на это прекрасное мероприятие, которое даст толчок инновационному развитию нашей непростой отрасли.
Спасибо большое, Виктор. Ну, как всегда, здравый очень голос, трезвый, рассудительный по делу. Я согласен с тем, что действительно многообразнее, чем наше представление о ней, да? И реальность тоже внутреннее ощущение склоняется к появлению гибридных продуктов, которые будут обладать теми достоинствами, свойствами сразу нескольких отдельно взятых инструментов. Это абсолютно логично, да. Однако это не снимает в полной мере вопрос, ответ на вопрос, что такое драйвинг форс в настоящее время.
We still have this question of what is the driving force. Though in the presentation you tried to answer this question, and I think that Russia will be one of the leaders in the development of innovations. Colleagues, we do have a couple of commentaries from the Association of Russian Banks, and I'd like to ask Alexander Nikolaevich Viktor, who is head of the department of the committee of Association of the Russian Banks on information security. Maybe he will come out with his comments. Good afternoon. I represent the Committee on Security of the Association of the Russian Banks. Well, we had a joint presentation, but I'm alone here. And for that matter, first and foremost, I'd like to say that security issues do exist, and specifically with the development of digital financial services. We heard about that challenges do exist, and the deputy chairman of the Bank of Russia spoke about that. The new technologies always change the landscape of the risks, and there is a contradiction always between the wish of the business to offer new services to clients and ensuring information security. So, regulators certainly help us in this, and they actually issue laws, though maybe a little bit late, but they still come out with various regulatory documents, and the process goes on, and there is nothing new in that, because, how should I put it? Well, providing certain financial services to the customer generates certainly new opportunities for fraudsters and for theft and robbery, etc., etc. According to the information we have, theft with the use of mobile banking and branches banking, well, went down actually, but it still exists. At the same time, naturally, we do have new opportunities to offer new services to the client, but the client, on the other hand, gets an opportunity to actually go into fraud. Certainly, there is not enough of literacy, and and there is certain progress, and we'll overcome that. Well, people learned finally not to drink fresh water or to wash their hands, so they will get certain knowledge and they will learn something with regard to the new products. But we have three issues. That is technological issue, technological component, regulatory and legal one. So technological issue will certainly have its solutions, but we so far do have problems with regard to technology. Secondly, in Russia, maybe with regard to technology, our situation is a little better because quite a lot of applications are developed by our Russian developers, and we can actually influence them somehow. But at the same time, the developers very often come out of hand, and well, finally we decide that okay, very well, let the regulator control the situation in this sphere. Then the second issue is imperfection of the legislation, and we can speak on hours for hours on end about this. But you know the problem, and organizational issues relate to the fact that today the theft of funds is actually performed by organized groups, and as a matter of fact, not just one bank is involved in the process, but a whole chain of banks. And the interaction between banks is actually carried out on a voluntary basis. But we've got to change the situation, and the central bank supports us. We have certain proposals how to combat that fraud, but we've got to continue it and to reach our goals with regard to security of the system. We think that the bank interaction should be legitimate, and we must have a special body, and perhaps the Bank of Russia should be involved in that or lead the process. And this body, or rather the function of this body should be not just to organize the interaction of the banks and to care about those who suffered from fraud. We've got to think about those vulnerabilities of the applications developed by our developers. Today, it seems quite natural that a new application will lead to new risks because certain aspects were not taken into consideration. But I think that we should somehow improve the situation, because otherwise we'll keep talking about the same things, maybe giving different examples. Many people remember the times when there were such mottos. One motto was from safety regulations to safe technology, but the aim of it was to have a safe object rather than safety regulations. So, and the same could be actually used with regard to new products. The product should be safe. How to do that? That is something to be discussed. But the main idea is to make the developer, the producer, to do that, to create a safe product. They're not willing to do that. They do not think of that. They I communicated with them quite a lot. Well, nobody is against safe products, but they are not willing to pay for the safety under the environment we have. So we've got to create an environment and consolidate our efforts. Just an association of Russian banks cannot do that. We're a public organization and we do not have regulatory functions. Well, in our committee, we have representatives of the security staff of the banks who work on the problem. But without the support of the central bank, it will be difficult to speak about safety and security of the product. Thank you very much, Mikhail. I'm very happy that we heard your presentation, and indeed we've got to remember about all aspects of the problem and to overlook the rest. That is something very dangerous. We've got to think of how to compensate for the risks which we face. And now I'd like to take your advice. You see that we're behind the schedule, so there was a good reason for that. But we have two ways to do that. To do the following. We have two very interesting and very important presentations which are related to the development of digital financial services. Then we have lunch. The time for lunch is quite long. Well, maybe we should not stop our discussion at this point. Maybe let us have it a little longer. And after lunch, we'll continue our discussion. Now I'd like to give the floor to John Owens, and he will introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Mikhail. I guess the next two presenters, if we can also keep to the time, I think we'll talk about M-Pesa's project and Vodafone's experiences in mobile financial services, as well as a presentation from MTS on opportunities of financial services market. First, I'll start with Selma, who has joined us, Selma Rabika, who has joined us from the Commercial Strategy and Product Innovation Department at Vodafone, working on M-Pesa. We've all heard that the success of M-Pesa that's been operated in multiple markets now, primary success beginning in Kenya and Tanzania, but also now offered in many other markets, and recently in Eastern Europe, in Romania. So on that note, I'll turn it over to Selma.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, спасибо большое за приглашение. Я недавно жила в Москве и научилась этот замечательный язык немножко. Поэтому я очень рада, что я вернулась поговорить именно по этой теме. Мобильные деньги. Тема, которая, по-моему мнению, имеет потенциал поменять жизнь к лучшему большой части населения этой страны. Если не возражаете, я буду продолжать по-английски.
Of population in this country. If you don't mind, I will continue in English because still I speak English better than Russian.
So I think you got a really, really good overview of speaking regulator to regulator from Mr. Mwaura earlier. I will try to focus my presentation on what many mentioned today is the M-Pesa business model. Because the innovation here is really not about technology. Technology is quite simple, it's the payment processing platform, but it's the business model and managing a low margin environment of the business model and adapting a product to the poorest people in the country, to those that are most sensitive to the cost, is what made this a successful story, and that's why I am invited today to talk about it. So the story definitely started in Kenya and with our partner Safaricom. When we saw in Vodafone that Safaricom and M-Pesa are taking many customers, we decided to set up a central team in London in Vodafone headquarters, which is the team in which I work, with two tasks. One was to roll out M-Pesa and repeat the success story in all the Vodafone markets where we see the product being relevant. And the second task is to look at how the product should evolve in the future so that we don't get stuck with basic financial services but keep on evolving in constant dialogue with the regulator, step by step, and deepening that financial inclusion that we have set up. So in the presentation, I'll start really briefly about why mobile money, how was it born. I'll talk a little bit about development of M-Pesa, the history. Then I'll move into the detail of the model because I think it's really important to understand what kind of enabling environment from regulatory point of view has to be in place, but also what kind of economics need to be set up for this to work. And finally, I'll explain what are the success factors in our experience and the future potential of mobile money. So many people showed this slide today. We still have 2.5 billion people in this world without access to bank account and many more mobile subscriptions. I'll move to this slide because this graph is quite interesting. It's a little bit old. It's from 2011, but still it shows the picture. The gap between the dark blue line, which is the mobile penetration, and the financial services penetration, which is the light blue line, presents the opportunity. From telecom point of view, which is the company, the industry I work in, this gap, the larger the gap, the bigger the opportunity for us as telecom operators to enter the space and start providing basic financial services. As Simone mentioned, we do have some strategic advantages, resources that we can leverage upon, and that's our mass market experience. We are indeed really a mass market player. We have experience with distribution, namely prepaid airtime distribution that we manage in many countries. And finally, we have people with mobile phones, with handset. We have that channel and that secure SIM in people's hands. This is, again, a little bit of a repetition. It's a GSMA study done every year, as Simone mentioned. We are not the only ones in this space. There are other success stories as well. M-Pesa is only one of them, and we are happy for that. However, few remain. Out of 200 deployments, only over 20 have reached what we call the critical customer base. So M-Pesa started in Kenya, and as I said, after that we set up a team and started rolling it out in other markets. Today we are present and live in 10 countries, so you will see a concentration on the African continent, but we also added Egypt, a North African market, and India recently. A great challenge and very exciting place. And finally Romania this year. This is just very shortly for those that don't know, I apologize, who are familiar. This is how M-Pesa works. So if we start from the yellow corner up there, so it starts with the sender having the phone and being registered for the service at the agent, going to an agent, giving the agent $20 and getting in exchange e-money onto their wallet. It's all working on the simplest phone you can imagine, a feature phone. And this sender now decides to send money back to his parents who are still living in the village while he's working in the city, sets the amount, enters the phone number, and enters the PIN. We also, every customer has their own PIN, and that's the security step that we introduce. So the small fee, about 0.5% is the average fee we apply to transactions, is applied, and both sender and receiver receive a notification of the transfer being executed and the new balance. The model is tailored to the mass market, and more importantly, some of you had questions about price. More importantly, is tailored to a low micro values. This is about transactions which are less than $700 a year is the annual limit we apply in Kenya. And it's really about microtransactions. So it has to be simple to understand, encourage microtransactions, and we make it free for the customer to deposit money. But at the same time, we have to pay commission to the agents. So it's a carefully designed economics of the model that makes all the participant interest and see value in participating. I'm conscious of time, I'm being warned, so I'm going to try to move to the main part. This is what people use M-Pesa for. Mostly it's peer-to-peer transfer. And for us, this is the indication of the healthiest growth of customers. When we see people really using it, making their own uses, sending to each other, either sending, parents sending to students pocket money, or, people settling some debts in between themselves, or sending money back home to the parents, or paying for peer-to-peer services. This is really the part we want to see grow the most. Also, we see a lot of purchase of airtime, which creates us savings in distribution and the airtime distribution, and a few other areas growing. This is the current situation of M-Pesa. We calculate 30-day customers because we are in a business that sets aggressive targets to our company, so we look only at 30-day customers, so my numbers will be a little bit different. We have about 200,000 outlets currently around the world in our 10 countries. So this is a little bit with examples from Romania, just a bit on tariffs and commissions. You will see that the idea behind M-Pesa is to make it really cheap to send even $1. Now back to the price, you will see that if you go to a bank or if you go to use your card to pay something, or Western Union or MoneyGram, you will see that transactions under $30 or $50 are punitively priced. There is an element of the fixed cost that makes microtransactions just very, very expensive. So you will see people delaying, waiting and saving time, saving money before they send a big transaction. Our model is really targeting the microtransactions. We really want to enable the smallest amount being sent, and this is our target market. These are our early adopters, people who don't have access to financial services, have low income, and have need to send small transactions. In Romania, you will see it's an interesting market. I think statistically it could be compared to Russia because it's what we call a dual economy, where about half people have access to financial services while others don't. And then you will see it's also a cash-driven society where card transactions are only a small fraction. It's a large international remittances market, which we made a part of our core proposition when we launched M-Pesa there. And we see also large domestic money transfer. So these are some of the examples of target markets. We do target domestic remittances in Romania as well because it does make sense. People in Romania, similarly like in Kenya before M-Pesa, use buses to send money to their family in north of Romania, from south to north, etc. We also see a significant potential in small business, peer-to-peer sales. There is a lot of peer-to-peer business that we can cater to. It's just an example of a customer. I am not gonna go into detail just to save time, because this is the important part. What we see from our experience in 10 markets, and not all 10 markets succeeded, we saw some failures as well, is success factors are not about technology. It's about proportionate regulation, enabling regulation, and proportionate to the value of transactions that we manage. Distribution network, so important, vast distribution network. Our number of branches in all the countries are set to be 3 to 10 times more than the total banking branches or Western Union branches in every country. And then, of course, we need to have people's trust. We need to build that trust, have a good technology that's not going to break, and a management buy-in means we have, because the business case is lean, and this is not a product that when we launch in Vodafone, people get very excited about the returns they're going to get in the next 6 months. We need to have a management that believes in the model and keep on investing that OPEX for 3 years until we start actually making money, because it's a low margin high volume business. From the regulatory point of view, we usually have 3 asks. Well, I would say 4. First one is to be regulated directly. We see that we apply directly for the e-money license for specific limited amount of services, and we look for a regulator to understand that. Second thing is to enable us to have that large distribution network, which is so important. So we want to be able to have every little shop in the village become our agent. The only thing they will do is to accept cash and give e-money in return, and vice versa. So we want this to be enabled from the regulatory point of view. We also want simplified KYC processes. Going back to the limits in Romania, our limits are on basic KYC, which means a person comes, fills up one sheet of paper with basic information, shows the ID, then they can transact up to €70 per transaction, but with an annual limit of 1,200 euros. This is Romania example. If they decide to transact more or start using the service for other things, then they send us the copy of ID, and that limit goes to 5 or 10,000. Also, really important thing to wrap up, I will not go through all of my slides, is that to say that our systems are and our business processes are fully in line with FATF recommendations. We have softwares and technology capability to screen our customers, and we do that regularly, and that's really important element, because the last thing we want to do is to lose the trust in the brand and in the service. I will move really quickly to the last slide to close the discussion. In every market, we see this as a journey. We start with basic services. In every market, people who don't have bank account need to send money to each other, need a more efficient way to pay their bills, need a more efficient way to buy airtime. Then we move into ATM. We integrate ATMs into our system. We start connecting M-Pesa to banks. We also start addressing businesses. Some businesses are dispersing salaries through M-Pesa. Some governments are dispersing their social help via M-Pesa. It's way more efficient, it eliminates leakages, etc. And the final stage is what we mentioned a few times, like M-Shwari in Kenya and M-Power in Tanzania. It's the savings and loans product. We enable people who never had a credit rating before, now have it because they're our customer. We look at their GSM spending, we look at their M-Pesa behavior, and they become eligible for small loans. So the potential of mobile money starts from basics, but then can move into areas that really change people's lives. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for speeding up. I know we're running a little bit behind schedule. The last presentation is by Andrey Makarov on MTS, our opportunities of financial services. He's the director of the Department of the Financial Services Marketing, GSC, Mobile Telesystem.
Thank you. Всем спасибо. Мое выступление получается отделять всех от обеда, из-за этого я постараюсь быть очень кратким.
Presentation very quickly because that takes us away from our lunch. I have only 8 slides. The first one. First and foremost, I'd like to say, actually to add something to Viktor. I saw a very surprised face from the Citibank. So they were the very first bank who made cash back to the banking card. Though I quite agree with the statements about the unique solutions, well, the bank of Alektinkov, and I told him about that last week, and Kiwi is quite a good solution. What I'd like to tell you is that we do really have quite a lot of interesting solutions in Russia, and but somehow I'd like to say something else, and I'd like to start with a statement. I'd like to quote John Chapman Barron, the inventor of the cash machine. Soon, he said, we will do all our shopping only by using mobiles, and well, I really think that we'll have more and more mobile payments, but at this particular stage, I'm sure that each of us has performed at least one operation. Well, as a matter of fact, even SMS message about payment with banking card is in that category. Well, a couple of things relating to legal issues. So what are the particularities of signing a contract for mobile communications services with individuals, and what documents we've got to sign? What documents the representative of the mobile operator has to sign? First of all, that is a subscriber's contract, and we need an ID document for the purpose, that is the passport, and that is one of the points we spoke about, that is know your client, and that is something that we just must do. Then, honestly, I'll tell you that the trend that telcos were included in the list of organizations that must comply with the anti-money laundering and anti-terrorist financing. Well, I do think that we must identify our clients and be absolutely clear about that, and we must know to whom we formalize the SIM card. Why should we do that? Because under the current situation, it's a pity we do not have a very clear picture, but anyway, you can see the picture, current situation. Here we see the activity of our subscribers all over the territory of Russia. So you see that our subscribers are all over the country, not only the country, but all over the world, actually, and you see the statistics too, and you see the activity of these people is 23 hours 50 minutes per day. That is, the people are actually using their mobile phones round the clock, and the peak is certainly during the daytime. The operators are working in mobile commerce, and the statistics which we have shows that we have over 2 million people who are registered participants in mobile commerce. These are active clients. Well, and the turnover with regard to mobile commerce exceeds 4.5 billion rubles. I think that this is quite a good indicator, and there is still room to grow, but we are actually at the very start of the way. But the main thing is that these are the people who are not just in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, in cities who are using mobile commerce quite actively, but they're also doing that in other regions, but doing that in a different manner. Some use applications, mobile applications, others use the internet.
проникновение смартфонов, и, знаете, недавно была статья о том, что в продажах смартфоны составляют более 67%. Это правда так, и мы через нашу розницу мы стимулируем население приобретать смартфоны, потому что дешевые варианты для начала. Но главное это то, что все равно смартфонов на данном этапе на рынке в районе 35%. Нашей базы МТС. Видите, на других рынках где-то есть чуть больше, где-то есть меньше. Этот показатель будет увеличиваться, но все равно существуют обыкновенные телефоны, кнопочные, без возможности установки приложений. И мы должны ориентироваться в том числе и на них. В Кении смартфонов еще меньше, и люди пользуются финансовыми сервисами. Я также анализировал с коллегами, какое количество сейчас мобильных приложений, которые предоставляют какие-то финансовые сервис-услуги. Вот Виктор в том числе сказал, что правда их много. Какие-то заточены под определенные действия. Кто-то вот работает с мобильным банком, кто-то с кошельком, кто-то специально на денежные переводы ориентирован. Их правда очень много. Но если у меня получается есть там счет в одном банке, счет в другом банке, то мне, значит, нужно поставить два приложения. Потому что банки не очень сильно обмениваются данными друг между дружками, и мало приложений, которые могут позволить пропускать через себя все. И плюс это нужно установить. То есть вы должны установить приложение, а во многих смартфонах для этого уже необходимо иметь банковскую карту, для того, чтобы это приложение не купить, хоть оно и бесплатно, все равно активировать счет. В планах развития мобильной коммерции у компании МТС, это как раз сделать так, чтобы счет мобильного телефона стал этим инструментом, этим доступом к финансовым сервисам для любого абонента компании МТС. Для этого не нужно загружать какое-то приложение, но для удобства можно его загрузить. Но главное, это возможность работы, используя сим-карту МТС. Мы набросали сервисы, которые уже существуют. Знаете, у многих партнеров уже существуют виртуальные карточки. У нас вот есть легкий платеж, это онлайн-платежи с лицевого счета, а также можно туда привязать банковскую карту любого банка. Мы осуществляем денежные переводы с банковской карты на банковскую карту, а также на систему денежных переводов. То есть в какой-то степени это уже МПС. То есть вы можете взять и перечислить деньги в компанию денежных переводов и прийти там, где предприниматель получит. Согласен, что то, что сказала Селма, ориентация МПС в Румынии была на микроплатежи. Согласен. К этому нужно идти, и население наше со временем к этому придет. Мы также первые в России запустили бесконтактные платежи NFC, то есть можно получить в салоне связи МТС сим-карту с NFC и иметь возможность ее оплачивать как с привязанной банковской карты, так и с абонентского счета. Например, у нас есть ряд проектов, запущенных с транспортом в Казани, в Новосибирске, в других городах. Ну что мы хотим сделать? И первое, я считаю, что очень правильно у нас развивается в России госуслуги. И для этого есть решение электронная цифровая подпись, которую можно поставить на сим-карту. Потому что не обязательно это должны быть финансовые операции. Это могут быть и госуслуги. Знаете, мне вчера позвонила жена и сказала: распечатай мне, пожалуйста, 2 талона, по которым я могу прийти в поликлинику, потому что талоны на запись. Я говорю: а ты можешь с телефона это показать? Она сказала: нет.
Они просят распечатать. Принтер что-то дома не работает. Вот это неудобно, и мы можем это исправить. Для этого необходим мобильный телефон с поддержкой NFC, хотя можно даже и без поддержки NFC, просто правильные должны быть ридеры, и это будет у меня выбор. Мы заинтересованы в развитии импеза, либо аналога импеза, о том, что можно получить наличные по номеру телефона в любом банкомате, в любом посттерминале. Мы заинтересованы в этом, и мы готовы работать с партнерами в данном направлении. Мы хотим также, чтобы можно с помощью мобильного телефона оплачивать товары и услуги как в онлайне, так и в офлайне. И это возможно. NFC один из вариантов, есть и другие. Микрофинансирование на лицевые счета. Мы считаем, что это правильно, и это необходимо делать. Есть определенные моменты с точки зрения законодательства, которые должны полностью нам предоставить такую возможность. И страхование. Вы знаете, я вот честно очень заинтересован в страховании. Когда ты хочешь ехать за рубеж, тебе нужно страховой полис. Но не хочу я идти его брать. Почему я не могу его взять и купить онлайн и закачать себе в телефон, чтобы у меня это было? Потому что с телефона все равно все летают. Плюс страховые выплаты. Почему я должен идти в страховую компанию, получать страховые выплаты, если можно это все получить на кошелек? Кошелек, которому доступ является то, что вы помните всегда, это номер вашего мобильного телефона. Да, кстати, название, которое я, знаете, недавно в компании МТС, и мне сложно всегда было запомнить это. ISDN. Вы знаете, сокращенно, это просто номер вашего мобильного телефона. Следующий слайд, я решил остановиться на электронной цифровой подписи, потому что я считаю, что за этим будущее. Потому что есть возможность открыть получить банковский продукт, не заходя в отделение, не заполняя большое количество бумаг. И, если не ошибаюсь, то как раз сегодня об этом Сергей Анатольевич упоминал о том, что важно, чтобы был безбумажный удаленный доступ для сервисов, для клиентов. И транзакции могут быть более безопасны. То есть сейчас есть ограничения на определенные транзакции, которые можно проводить без идентификации. Тут будет идентификация, мы можем больше получить. И мой последний слайд. Это выводы, которые и барьеры, которые на данном этапе мы видим. Отсутствие банковской инфраструктуры не является проблемой для увеличения проникновения платежей и сервисов. Потому что если нет банковского терминала, то все возможно получить, и можно получить на мобильный телефон, либо операцию провести через мобильный посттерминал, который можно подключить к мобильному телефону. Мы, как операторы, также я уверен, что другие операторы связи готовы предоставить доступ к финансовым и нефинансовым услугам населению, и для этого работать активно как с банковскими организациями, так и небанковскими. То, что говорил по поводу безопасности, наш процессинг, он сертифицирован PCI DSS, и все, что мы предлагаем, они сертифицированы но все равно есть определенные барьеры, это необходимые доработки, чтобы эти платежи происходили. Знаете, работа в компании MasterCard, мы долго работали над тем, чтобы принимались бесконтактные платежи MasterCard PayPass в торговых сетях, и банки меняли посттерминалы. Для того, чтобы на все работал, да, это необходимо сделать. Да, необходимо сделать еще кое-какие доработки, если мы хотим, чтобы по номеру телефона можно было провести платежи. То же самое по электронной цифровой подписи. Я знаю о том, что многие компании, которые предоставляют госуслуги, они устанавливают считывающие терминалы. Я понимаю, что должны дальше
they install special terminals.
И определенные требования законодательства, я об этом, наверное, сейчас не буду уже останавливаться, это как рабочий вопрос. Будем работать с...
We'll speak about that later on in the working groups with our colleagues. Thank you very much. And I do believe that a mobile phone can become an access for all of us to unique services, both financial and non-financial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrey, and thank you for keeping to the time. I know, unfortunately, we're a little short. I guess we don't have time for questions.
Тоже сохранили нам достаточно большое количество времени. Коллеги, я думаю, что у нас сейчас будет прекрасная возможность пообщаться за обедом. Всем желающим и продолжить после обеда. Я хотел бы искренне поблагодарить спикеров прошедшей секции. Андрею отдельное спасибо за то, что вы показали нам возможности, которыми уже сейчас располагает система мобильных финансовых услуг в России на примере МТС. Это не единственный пример, но вы очень ярко его показали. Мне кажется, единственное, вам не хватает такого яркого имени для проекта. Может быть, МТС Пеза или как-то так. Коллеги, у нас получился, как мне кажется, очень мощная первая часть, такой стартовый аккорд, но, как известно, любые, и в том числе цифровые финансовые услуги, стоят на определенной триаде необходимых вещей. Это регулирование, и регулирование мы обсудили достаточно подробно, в том числе и проблемы, которые с ним связаны. Это риски и технологии, это защита прав потребителя. Вот наше послеобеденное продолжение дискуссии будет посвящено как раз двум оставшимся опорам, без которых, безусловно, развитие как цифровых финансовых услуг, так и любых других финансовых инноваций не может быть успешным. Мы поговорим более подробно о технологиях, это будет очень интересная презентация. И поговорим затем о том, как в этом быстро меняющемся мире не забыть про потребителя, потому что действительно все это очень удобно, здорово, но насколько потребитель готов, насколько он может, и насколько он в состоянии отдавать себе отчет в последствиях использования тех или иных инноваций, это очень большая тема для Банка России, как я уже сказал, у нас создана служба по защите прав потребителей финансовых услуг. Я хотел бы авансом представить Илью Кочеткова, руководителя службы, который будет вести одну из секций в послеобеденное время. Спасибо.